Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to take a moment to share a video with you that's a little longer than what Twitter suggests or allows. So I'm making it on YouTube and uploading it, and you can click the link and watch it. And it's just kind of a brief discussion on classical education, the trivium, um, and how I'm implementing them in non-traditional ways. And I don't think classical education has a set format for what a school should look like. I mean, we model our schools after traditional schools with a traditional schedule, desks, and the traditional structure of a school, yet it is infused with the philosophy of classical education, which I think is totally fine. I'm not at all against that. But I do, and I think many of us here believe in school choice. And the reason we believe in school choice is we feel like parents should have options because some structures don't work for some children. And I would be one of those parents where the traditional structure did not work for my firstborn. There are some who may hear me share my story and think that, well, you need to discipline him and make him sit in that chair. Um, when I was doing that, he developed some struggles. He began to stutter, began to see an anger and a frustration, and things got worse. It didn't work. And the Lord really convicted me about how he's made every child unique, every child different. And I had been in education for many years before my son was born. I got married late, started having kids late. And I was at the time when he was really getting into his education, an administrator. I was the director of education, and I went on to be a principal at another school in his early years, in his early education years. And so I was taking, and I'd worked my way up through public schools and went over into Christian and private schools. And so I had in my mind the ideal for how my son should learn. And he showed signs of being very smart. He was teaching himself how to write his name, and I kind of took these little signs. He was between the ages of 2 and 3, and I took these little signs of, oh, my son's brilliant. I'm going to just immediately put him in this traditional structure, and he's going to be the most brilliant child ever. He's going to read when he's 3, and he's going to be just the pride of my life. And he just made it very clear that he was not going to cooperate. And it did not matter how much I disciplined him, he was not willing to cooperate. And I remember the last time he and I had a discussion about his refusal to cooperate with my educational plan. And at that time, I was really getting into classical education. Um, he cried so hard, and my heart broke. And I really felt the Lord speak to me and said, what you're doing is wrong. I've made him a certain way. And that confused me because here I've been in these classical schools and I couldn't see how, and I was at this point in my life knowing that classical education was the only education right for my children. Um, and I'll have to, those who are watching me for the first time, I'll explain, or I have been explaining that the history of classical education in the Black community, how it is really, really relevant for our building of literacy, cultural literacy, intellectual strength here in this country that we have struggled to find a home in. So anyway, I knew that this was the best education for my child. And so I was at a loss. I didn't know how to implement classical education outside of the structures I had been working in. So I went on a journey I just kind of, I looked at him, I picked him up, I held him, and I said, I will never punish you for not learning in the way that I want you to learn. Mommy is going to learn how God has made you to learn. And that created a real shift in our relationship. And things have just been doing well ever since. But at the same time, I was still confused. So I went on this journey to find the right school for him. I could not find a classical school where he wouldn't find himself in somebody's principal's office or timeout chair every day. And so, and my son is not a bad child. He's not rebellious and rude. He's always been very sweet and, but He is very active. He probably in a public school they would have said he was ADHD, I think, but he's not. Um, he's extremely creative. He writes music. He has loves to have deep intellectual conversation. He's always into the why. When he plays his computer games, he wants to learn how to code the game, so he buys the books so that he can code them. He's 10 now. So he gets bored very easy by just simple information. If it's not complex information, he gets frustrated. He's very hungry for learning the deep details, the deep information. He's not comfortable being stuck at one place in the trivium, and I'm going to talk about the trivium in a minute. He's constantly pushing past boundaries. So I needed a way for him to learn, knowing that's how God had made him. So I began to look for a school, and I looked at a lot of different Christian schools. At this time, I was not even thinking of starting a school. Even though I was a principal, my favorite job is a kindergarten teacher. Like, I would have loved to retire doing that, but God had other plans. And so I went to schools that I knew he would not do well in, he wouldn't thrive in. And then I went to a non-Christian school that implemented a philosophy that the philosophy on paper seems antithetical to Christianity. And I want to be upfront about that. And I was very aware of that. But when I visited the school, the overall mentality behind it, I felt my son would thrive in a school similar to that because it would give him the freedom to take his learning as far as he wanted to go. And I wrestled because of some of the philosophy did not connect with scripture. And I went through scripture and I went through the philosophy, connecting those parts that I felt did. And the scriptures I thought of were when Paul tells Timothy, let no man despise thy youth, but be an example. The story of David, I found a lot of inspiration in and connecting it to this. It's called the Sudbury model, to this model, because he was told he couldn't kill the giant, and he did. He spent most of his time free out in the field writing music and developing his intellect in his own way, forgotten, but free. And so I felt like that was my son. So once I was able to reconcile all that with scripture, and I really began to set down what were some must-haves that I was going to constantly continue to disciple him in the Word of God. That was a non-negotiable. But other than that, I was going to give him a little more freedom in how he learned, implementing classical education as a tool for him to navigate this life. And so I began to look at the trivium in a different way. In the schools I'd worked in the past, you have the pre-grammar. If you implement some schools just go straight to call it grammar. All K through 6 is grammar, but I saw a chart where someone called it pre-grammar, and the pre-grammar is, I guess, like pre-K 4 to second grade. And I like that. So I have pre-grammar. You have pre-grammar, then you have grammar, which is 3rd through 6th. So you have pre-grammar, pre-K 4 through 2nd, grammar 3rd through 6th, logic 7th through 9th, sometimes end of 7th, early 9th. It's kind of flexible there. And then rhetoric, late 9th, 10th through 12th. And you think, traditionally, like you look at those parts of the trivium and you set up your school and the lower school, the upper school, and your kids, go through the trivium, learning the different things that they should learn. Like for in the grammar, they're learning the grammar, not grammar as an English grammar. I mean, that's a part of it, but grammar, you think building blocks. So you're teaching them phonics, their math facts, the English rules, the 50 states and capitals, the continents. Like it's like almost think of it as entering in the basic information into a child, like you would a computer. And they're learning this information, and they're learning how the information is connected. That's what's going on in the pre-grammar and grammar phases. In the logic phase, which is 7th or late 6th through 9th, early 9th, the logic phase, they're taking that information and showing how that's all interconnected, developing their worldviews around that information, being able to articulate the whys behind why is 2 plus 2 equal 4, and to the point where they could almost teach a class. They're taking a class called logic. They're learning about philosophy. They're learning to think critically beyond just the rote information. And there's always an overlap. You can do a little bit of that in grammar, but it just kind of helps you. Then when they get to the rhetoric phase, they are taking that logic. They're being able to explain the philosophy behind all this information they learn in the grammar phase, and they're developing really strong abilities to develop their own worldviews and to be able to articulate it. That's why a thesis is often done in the rhetoric phase. I think usually towards the 12th grade year, and they are able to stand and teach and present and create their own worldviews, figure out like theology. Christian theology is really taught. And if you're not a Christian school, you're learning even more philosophy. But if you're a Christian school, you're really into theology and you're able to really understand, what is the Trinity, and so that is the trivium. So my son was asking about the Trinity when he was like 7. And I had to literally go through this whole philosophical conversation about what is the Trinity. I think he was like 8, 7 or 8. So, as opposed to just receiving it with the heart of a child, he wanted to know, like, I don't get it. He just gave me, I don't understand the Trinity. It doesn't make any sense to me. And we had this conversation. So this is an example of the struggle I was having and why he needed to be in a school where he didn't have to be in the grammar phase if he didn't want to. He needed to be just wherever he needed to be in the trivium. So the big question I guess people are asking me is, how does that play out in a school, and how are you using the trivium in a non-traditional way? So I use the trivium in both ways. Sometimes you have kids that are just, my other two, especially my youngest son, is right in the trivium. He's like right on schedule. He's easy. And that's what his birth was like. And I don't even remember him crying as a baby. Like, he's just really easygoing. The rest of the family, all of us feel like he's kind of like the Rock. You can find a lot of comfort in him. He's just very easygoing. He has a lot of common sense wisdom, but he follows the trivium pretty well. That's just an example, but my oldest son doesn't. I'm not quite sure what my daughter's doing. She's 6, but we're working through that. But I have 3 children who are all literally night and day. They're not alike at all. All 3 have traces of my husband and I, but they're also different. But my oldest son is the wild card of the family. And so how am I using the trivium in a non-traditional way? And I hope I was clear in explaining how the trivium is done. So if you have grades pre-K through second, that would be your your pre-K through second would be considered the pre-grammar school, and all of your curriculum. And if you wanted more information, I would read Dorothy Sayers' The Tools for Learning, or The Lost Tools for Learning, and she explains these different parts of the trivium so that you can know how to set up your homeschool, your school, following these parts of the trivium. And the trivium is saying that the pre-grammar, grammar, logic, rhetoric is not curriculum. It's tools that are already in every child. So every child in the pre-grammar and grammar phase should have the grammar tools. They have this wiring in them that is able to take on large amounts of memorized information. That's how they're made. They can, or another word they'll say is the parrot. Like, they can parrot back to you, the 50 states, or a song they heard, or, Baby Shark, or the alphabet song. Like, they can just, I'm amazed at how my children can learn the songs of some of the shows they watch, like, overnight. So that's that pre-grammar, grammar, parrot. Again, the Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy Sayers. So you set up your school with that, and that's what's going on. You're doing chants and jingles, and you're singing, and they're being introduced to Latin, and they're doing Latin chants and all that stuff. So then the logic phase, they get into taking logic and talking through what they believe and what they understand, and being able to share back in their own words what they're understanding about the information. In the rhetoric phase, they're taking that information and they're building their own worldviews, their own perspectives, able to articulate what they're going through. So that's the traditional. You're setting up your schools based on the trivium. Again, check out Dorothy Sayers' Lost Tools for Learning to get a better understanding of that. My son Dylan was not anywhere. I mean, he was just kind of all over the trivium. So I'm finding, when I reflected on my public school years and private school years, every classroom has at least one child that's like that. um, it just really reflects the diversity of God. And when He created us, He didn't create us to be robots. He didn't create us to all be exactly the same. Public school believes that everyone should just be the same. If you don't, you just kind of are not smart, or you shouldn't be here. Or I'm a witness. I've gotten children all the time who come to my school feeling like they're dumb because they didn't fit into the system. Um, and so, and actually my mom says I was one of those children, but that's a whole nother story. So I needed a space for him to learn. And then in my figuring it out for him, I realized there are a minority. It's not a majority. It's a minority of children who are like him. I've taught them. I've seen them in schools. I've been in situations where I've been a teacher or a principal, and I felt helpless because the child didn't fit into the system. Classical education is so beautiful in that we have this trivium, we have the classic texts, we have the history of antiquity, and we have the writings of those who were classically educated. We have this material. We have this trivium that helps us understand how God made children. One thing I think we need to really explore is how can this information be implemented in non-traditional ways when you have a child that doesn't perfectly fit in the flow of the trivium. So what I do is I use the trivium in both ways. I use it to set up, my curriculum. I kind of have an idea of where kids fall, but I also flip it and use it when I get students who aren't following the flow of the trivium to assess where they are in the trivium. And then that allows me to figure out what curriculum or what program I should be doing with that child. And so that's why I don't have grades or grade levels in my class, like explicitly articulated. I'll put it on like their transcript, or I'll communicate it to their parent. I don't even communicate it to the child because I don't want them to feel left behind if they are behind. But the parent knows. It's just done really carefully. Um, and so I, um, yeah, so I use it to do that. So I use it to assess where my kids are. So a real practical example would be I 2 years ago received a student. He literally walked in off the street, a Hispanic student who had been going to the local public school. My school is in the neighborhood of like 3 public schools and some of the worst public schools in the county, but that's a whole nother story. And he walked in off the street, and he was 13. And he says to me, he had his mom with him who did not speak English, and he says, "Can you teach me?" And I said, "Wow, okay." And now this was a child. Now he was 13. He did not know anything about classical education or my thoughts on that I've shared with you just a moment ago. And he says, "I cannot read. I cannot spell my name. And I've been going to this school all these years, and no one will teach me." Now, I don't know the whole history behind it. My guess with how motivated he was in my school is that he was telling me the truth because he became very motivated. I said, "Sure." And the mom spoke to him in Spanish, and he came back and he says, "We don't have a lot of money." And he gave me a little bit about his background. And I couldn't say no. So that's why our school is set up to, we have a program where some families can pay what they can afford. If their story is meaningful and you can really tell they're really crying out for help and they're self-motivated, we try to get everyone in. And so he was so bad he couldn't even spell his name. And so I was nervous at first, and I said, wow, how is he going to even fit into this classical model? How is he going to even read the text? He's 8th grade. And I felt it was God. I felt he reminded me of what I did with my own child. Now, for my child, it wasn't hard because he wasn't behind. So I used the trivium to diagnose where he was, and he was farther along in the trivium than most kids. So I created a program for him that worked with that for him, giving him some time in rhetoric, giving him some time in logic. Our school is small, by the way, and so every teacher has like at least 7 students. So we can give all these kids this individualized attention like this. So the Lord just reminded me that I can do the same thing with a child who's behind. And so of course I used the trivium to say he is in the pre-gram. Well, he wasn't in pre-grammar. He was like 3rd grade level, but he couldn't read. But he had some skills. So I would say he was late pre-grammar, early grammar. That's where he was. And without saying, "Hey, you're in 2nd grade and you're 13, I said, "Do you mind if I just teach you how to read and do math? Let's start with that." Because if he was already I think he was 7th grade at the time, I didn't have long, because if he's going to graduate on time, I really didn't have long. So it was really about he wasn't going to be able to take everything that would normally go on in an elementary school. It was really about, let's get you to do reading and math. Let's get that. And then hopefully in the next 2 years, even 3 years, I can just plop you in, high school classes and you can graduate on time or even a year late, but you'll be okay. And that's how I used the Trivium. And he is here today reading and doing math and starting, is it pre-algebra this year, which means that he will most likely graduate on time. I'm nervous, but that's where we are. That's how I use the Trivium. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone. So I use the Trivium both ways. I use it traditionally. I have students who are flowing right through that Trivium. I have students who are like, I'm so past that grammar phase. I'm over here in rhetoric, and that's where they are. And then I have students who come to me behind. So I say, okay, you're in the grammar phase. Let's get this book. You're gonna take this book, and that helps me choose a curriculum. And I talk to the teachers, and I say, this is what they're lacking. These are grammar. This is the grammar they're missing, not English grammar, but the building blocks they're missing. Let's work on building that for the next 1 to 2 years, and then we can put him closer to his right grade or right space. Um, uh, Okay, and that's how I did it. And so you can use the Trivium both ways. We don't have to be stuck that if they're not going through this, oh my goodness, my child is behind. You can flip the Trivium and say, okay, where are they in the Trivium? And let me get my education. Let's educate them based on that. If you are a homeschooler, that's really easy to do. They're your baby. You can do it right there in your house. If you are a school, I would suggest, if you had the finances to do it, to hire a specialist for students who may not be where they need to be in the Trivium. And depending on how far behind they are, and I don't like to use the word behind, they could be like, I found that kids who are not where they need to be in the Trivium usually are very artsy and creative. And so their imagination keeps them from being where they need to be because they're so distracted by all that they're dreaming up in their mind. Then I found that they're behind because the schooling they had was so poor. So the specialist it would kind of be, because it's usually not a lot of kids. The specialist could have kind of an open classroom, and you kind of give her that handful of children, and maybe you have more than one, but that room doesn't have grades and grade levels, but they're working through, if they're behind, they're working through whatever grammar they're missing. Now, I've worked in classical schools where, like I remember I worked at a classical school where we had a student who was way above where he needed to be, and we just skipped him. And he graduated at like 16, and he graduated from college at like 20, and he's doing his thing now. So it's easier to do when they're farther along. You can just kind of put them in the part of the Trivium of the school that they can thrive in, instead of saying, no, you can't go there. Like, that could be really crushing too. But students who may be behind, maybe you have an open classroom, you have the Trivium so you can know where they are, and they each, and I always have a realistic conversation. I sit down with the child out of love and I say, listen, I don't want you to feel like you're not the most wonderful, beautiful, brilliant person, but somewhere along the way, someone missed some building blocks for you. And so you're with me here because I want to give you these building blocks. And once you kind of get a handle on those building blocks, I'm going to plop you back in where you fit, where you should be. And they're usually very grateful. Like, if I have that conversation, instead of talking over them to their parent and making them feel dumb, like really edifying, affirming them, and letting them know that you're there to help get them on point, it usually goes really well. And I found that this young man who came to me not even know how to spell his name was very receptive to my support. Was okay if sometimes he was in a group of kids that were younger than him, because I let him know, and I would tell the kids, like, Tony is, I didn't mean to say his name, but he is here with us because we are here to help him. If anybody makes fun of him being here, you're immediately in trouble. But the kids began to be really supportive. They began to look up to him. And so you create that environment of support, because that is what schools should be doing. Schools should not be this factory where kids are made to feel less than because they're not where they're supposed to be. We're supposed to be here ministering to kids, helping them, supporting them, getting them to where they need to be, building up their self-esteem that has probably been torn down because they've been behind and made to feel like they're not smart. And then also another thing I'll do is I'll find where their gifting is. Like, this young man is really good with his hands. He can build things. He can put things together. So when we would order furniture or whatever, he was the go-to man. If something broke, he became the go-to man. So that the kids, staff, like, Tony, can you fix this? Can you build this? and he could do that. And he's also just tends to have this real desire to help. So he was always helping. If I came to school with boxes of curriculum, he would be the first one out to help me bring the boxes into the building and organize it. And he would organize cleaning crews to do this, that, and the other. So you find that gifting while you're working through them because you're building up their spirit while you're getting them to the point they need to be. So I hope this video was helpful to someone. I'll probably do another one, and I'm open to any questions anyone may have after I post this video.